What if the person you called your soulmate, the one you trusted with your deepest secrets, could transform into a monster overnight? What if someone you loved, someone you thought you knew, could turn your world into a nightmare in a matter of hours? This is the story of Heather Ann Bodden, a woman who thought she knew the man she loved, a woman who never saw it coming. One moment, she was living her life, planning her future, and the next, she was gone. Murdered by the very person who promised to protect her. It wasn't the kind of crime you hear about every day. No, this wasn't a random act of violence or some heated altercation that spiraled out of control. This was something far colder, far more calculated. And it all started with a betrayal so deep, it would take the life of a woman and destroy everything she had built. Imagine this. You get a message. Your friend is in trouble. You rush to check on her, and what you find shakes you to your core. The person responsible? Someone you never thought could hurt a fly. Someone who was meant to be her protector. That's exactly what happened when Heather Ann Bodden's friends walked into her apartment that fateful day. What they found wasn't just a murder. It was the kind of horror that makes you question everything about trust. How could someone she loved do this? How could someone who was supposed to be her everything do something so irreversible? The moment the police arrived at the crime scene, they realized this wasn't a crime of passion or a spur-of-the-moment attack. This was methodical. This was the result of something darker, something Heather never had the chance to uncover. And the man responsible? He was already gone. Or so it seemed. This isn't just about a woman's brutal death. This is about the lies we believe, the faces we trust, and the chilling truth that sometimes the person closest to you is the one who can destroy you. Welcome to another episode of True Crime Mystery Vault. If you're ready to explore the full story, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below. Because this is just the beginning. And trust me, you won't want to miss a second of what comes next. Heather Ann Bodden was a woman who, by all accounts, had everything to live for. At 41 years old, she was a mother, a daughter, and a friend to many. Her life, although not without its struggles, was filled with moments of hope, love, and dreams for a brighter future. Born and raised in Yankton, South Dakota, Heather was known for her kindness, her willingness to help others, and her unwavering devotion to her 12-year-old daughter. She was a mother who made every decision with one person in mind: her child. The love for her daughter was the center of her world. From the moment she became a mother, Heather's sole focus was to provide a safe, happy life for her daughter. Everything else, every other relationship, took a back seat to that promise. Despite the challenges she faced, single motherhood, working tirelessly to make ends meet, and raising her daughter in a world full of uncertainty, Heather always maintained a positive attitude. But Heather's life wasn't just about being a mother. She had aspirations too. She dreamed of a better life for her daughter, one where she could give her everything Heather had never had. She envisioned a stable future, a happy family, and a sense of peace that had long evaded her. Yet, as fate would have it, that peaceful life was taken away, brutally and violently, by someone who should have been her protector. And then there was Craig Allen Nichols Jr. At first glance, Craig seemed like the kind of man Heather needed in her life. He was 32, not much younger than Heather, and they had been dating for several months before the tragedy unfolded. Their relationship began like any other, slowly, cautiously, but with genuine affection. He seemed charming, attentive, and caring, a man who could potentially offer Heather the stability she had long sought. For a brief moment, Heather thought she had found someone she could trust, someone who would be there for her, someone who could be the father figure her daughter needed. Craig had a job at a local construction company, and from the outside, he appeared to have his life together. But as with many relationships, things weren't always as perfect as they seemed. Slowly, small red flags began to surface. At first, they were subtle, minor arguments that seemed like typical relationship spats. But over time, Heather began to notice something darker beneath the surface. Craig was possessive, increasingly controlling, and began isolating Heather from her friends. She wasn't allowed to see her family as much as before. She found herself defending her every move, justifying why she needed time alone or why she couldn't answer his calls at all hours of the day. Friends close to Heather recalled hearing her express concerns about Craig's jealousy. He would get upset when she talked to other men, even those who were just acquaintances. It wasn't long before the emotional manipulation became more apparent, his behavior slowly turning from what seemed like a normal relationship into something much more toxic. There were even instances where Craig's temper flared, particularly when Heather questioned his actions. Her friends noted how quickly he would shift from calm to angry, and how Heather often seemed to walk on eggshells around him, unsure of what would set him off. The arguments were no longer just disagreements. They were moments filled with intense emotional and, at times, physical intimidation. Yet, despite these early signs, Heather was reluctant to believe the man she had come to care for could harm her. But one night, everything changed. The warmth and love that had characterized their relationship vanished. What followed would forever alter the course of Heather's life, and with it, the lives of those who knew her. The man who should have been her protector, her boyfriend, Craig Allen Nichols, was now the man accused of taking her life. Craig Nichols, a man who once seemed so trustworthy, had now become the prime suspect in Heather's murder. But how did a loving partner, a man who appeared to have a stable life, descend into violence so horrific it would end in the decapitation of the woman he claimed to love? To understand the crime, we must first look at the events that unfolded that fateful evening. The night when Heather's world and the lives of those who cared for her were shattered forever. Just days before her death, Heather sent a concerning text message to one of her close friends. The message was brief but chilling, enough to raise immediate alarm. Heather wrote, "Craig is threatening me with a weapon. He says he's going to hurt me." Those words were the last anyone would hear from Heather. Her friends, who were accustomed to Heather's strength and resilience, didn't immediately panic. It wasn't that they didn't take her seriously, but Heather had always been able to handle difficult situations before. Craig, though possessive and at times erratic, had never shown any signs of violence in their past interactions. But this time, Heather's voice in the text carried a weight they couldn't ignore. Yet, something didn't quite sit right with them. They texted her back, asking if she was okay, but there was no response. A few hours passed. The silence that followed was deafening. Her friends tried calling, but there was no answer. The hours stretched into an agonizing wait, and as the night grew late, the worry turned to dread. By the next morning, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. That's when they decided they had to check on Heather to make sure she was safe. Little did they know that when they walked into her apartment, their lives would be changed forever. Heather's friends arrived at her apartment that day with heavy hearts, unsure of what they would find. The door to Heather's apartment was slightly ajar, just enough to spark the first wave of panic. They hesitated for a moment, unsure if they should push forward, but their fear quickly overtook their hesitation. They called her name. No response. The tension in the air was thick, each step toward the interior of the apartment a heartbeat that echoed in the silence. As they stepped further into the entryway, the sense of foreboding only grew. Everything seemed off. The apartment, once warm and familiar, now felt cold, foreign, like something was amiss. And then they saw it. The sight that greeted them was something no one should ever have to witness. They found Heather's body in the living room, lying lifeless in a pool of blood. But it wasn't just the blood that would forever haunt them. It was the horror of what had been done. Her body had been decapitated. The chilling reality set in slowly. At first, they couldn't process what they were seeing. Their minds tried to make sense of it, to convince them that they were wrong, that there had to be another explanation. But there was no denying it. Heather's head had been placed in a trash bag. It wasn't just a gruesome sight, it was a deliberate act, one that seemed to speak of hatred, of rage. Her friends stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move, paralyzed by the shock of the discovery. They immediately called 911, their voices trembling as they reported what they had found. The police arrived shortly thereafter, but nothing could prepare them for what they would encounter inside the apartment. As law enforcement arrived at the scene, they quickly realized the magnitude of the crime. The apartment was in disarray, clothes scattered on the floor, overturned furniture, and a sense of chaos that seemed out of place for a woman who had prided herself on creating a safe haven for her daughter. On closer inspection, the bloodstains told a story of their own. They led investigators to the kitchen, the hallway, and eventually to the living room, where Heather's body was found. The blood was still fresh in places, a grim reminder of the violence that had taken place not long before. But it wasn't just the blood that told the story. It was the weapons found at the scene. 2 knives and a pair of blood-stained gloves, discarded carelessly as though the killer had no fear of being caught. There was also something else. Clothing soaked in blood, hidden beneath a rug. At first, it seemed like a hasty attempt to hide evidence, but the stains on the fabric confirmed that Heather had fought for her life. She hadn't gone down without a struggle. What stunned investigators even more was the surveillance footage from the building. It revealed Craig Nichols' movements around the time of Heather's death. The cameras captured him entering and exiting Heather's apartment multiple times, his hands carrying large trash bags that seemed unusually heavy. His demeanor was unsettling, as though he was aware of the chaos he had just left behind, but unfazed by the gravity of his actions. Investigators followed the footage, tracing Craig's every move, trying to piece together the events leading up to Heather's murder. Each frame seemed to provide a chilling confirmation that the man who had once been Heather's partner was now the very person responsible for taking her life. The discovery of Heather's head in the trash bag sealed it. Craig had taken her life in the most brutal way, and the scene before investigators was one of meticulous, calculated violence. The question that would remain was, why? Why would someone close to Heather, commit such an act of violence? At first, the investigators considered multiple possibilities. Was it a break-in gone wrong? Could it have been an intruder who attacked Heather in a fit of rage? Or was there something darker lurking closer to home? As the facts piled up, the theory of an intimate partner violence turned out to be the most plausible explanation. The case, it seemed, was pointing to one person, Craig Allen Nichols Jr. But why? Craig Nichols had been in a relationship with Heather for several months, but the investigation revealed a much more complicated picture than anyone had initially realized. As detectives dug into Craig's background, they uncovered a history of violent outbursts, emotional manipulation, and even a past arrest for assault. Craig wasn't new to conflict. He was no stranger to aggression. Still, there was nothing solid to directly link him to the murder. Until they reviewed the building's security footage. Did this footage prove that Craig had murdered Heather? Or was there another explanation? At this point, investigators couldn't be sure. Maybe Craig had been trying to help Heather. Maybe he had discovered the crime before the police and was trying to clean up the scene, though the footage showed no evidence of distress or urgency. It could have been a chance encounter with someone else at the scene, a witness perhaps. There were so many questions still unanswered. The tension mounted. Was Craig guilty? Or was he just a man who had the misfortune of being in the wrong place at the wrong time? But as the investigation continued, new developments began to surface. Twists and turns that threatened to confuse even the most experienced detectives. For a brief moment, investigators began to question whether the crime was truly committed by Craig alone. Was there someone else? Someone who had gone unnoticed in the earlier stages of the investigation? The thought of a second person sent detectives on a wild goose chase, sifting through leads that ultimately went nowhere. But with every new theory came new evidence that quickly led them back to Craig. Surveillance footage of him at the scene, his movements around the apartment building, and his unrelenting silence. As each piece of the puzzle clicked into place, the theory of Craig being the sole perpetrator grew stronger, even as doubts lingered. Still, the question remained. Why would Craig kill Heather? What was the trigger that led to such a brutal, cold-blooded murder? The arrest of Craig Nichols was the moment the entire investigation had been building toward. But it wasn't a clean, swift capture. No, it was far more complex and far more chilling. When law enforcement moved in to arrest Craig at his residence, they found the doors locked and the windows shut tight. He wasn't answering his phone, and his friends and family hadn't heard from him in hours. The police forced entry into the apartment and found Craig barricaded inside, refusing to cooperate. It was clear that Craig knew what was happening. He knew the walls were closing in on him, and instead of surrendering, he chose to hide, to wait. Perhaps he thought the evidence would go unnoticed, that the investigation would falter without a confession. but the silence he maintained would speak louder than anything he could have said. The police found him sitting quietly in his living room, almost eerily calm, as if he had been prepared for this moment. When they told him they were arresting him for the murder of Heather Ann Bodden, there was no shock, no immediate response. He simply stood, as if accepting his fate, and allowed them to take him into custody. The chilling part of the arrest wasn't Craig's lack of resistance. It was the coldness in his eyes. It was as if the man sitting before them wasn't someone who had just killed a woman. It was as if he had become someone else entirely, someone incapable of feeling anything. As the police took Craig away, the investigation wasn't over. But one thing was certain: Craig Nichols would now have to face the consequences of his actions. And for Heather's family and friends, the journey toward justice was just beginning. Craig Nichols had a history of violent tendencies. He had been involved in multiple altercations in the past, and his relationships were often marked by an unhealthy level of control. His behavior with Heather escalated over time. Small arguments turned into heated confrontations, and his jealousy grew more intense. Was Craig's motive rooted in jealousy or control? As their relationship unraveled, he seemed to grow more possessive, unable to accept Heather's desire for independence. The murder wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime. It appeared calculated. Craig likely saw Heather's defiance as a challenge to his authority, one he couldn't let go unchecked. What pushed him to kill her? Was it the loss of control, or did he believe that taking her life was the only way to keep her in his grasp? After the arrest, the legal system began to piece together the grim details of the case. Craig Nichols faced serious charges: second-degree murder and first-degree manslaughter. The evidence seemed irrefutable. Surveillance footage, witness accounts, and forensic findings pointed directly at him. But Craig's defense team quickly jumped into action, filing a not guilty plea. The defense painted a picture of a man overwhelmed by emotions, suggesting the murder was a crime of passion, not premeditation. They argued that Craig acted impulsively during a heated argument, a defense that seemed to contrast sharply with the cold, calculated nature of the crime. But could this defense create enough doubt to sway a jury? Or would the mountain of evidence prove too much to overcome? As the trial approached, the weight of the evidence hung heavily in the air. Heather's loved ones hoped that justice would be served, but the courtroom is never predictable. Would new surprises emerge? Testimonies, legal maneuvers, or perhaps a last-minute revelation that could change the course of the case? One thing was clear. The trial would not only seek to answer the question of guilt, but would also bring Craig's motives and his past into full view. Would the truth be enough to secure a conviction, or would this case take an unexpected turn? With the trial on the horizon, the question looms large. Could Craig's defense undermine the case against him? Or would the evidence be powerful enough to finally bring justice to Heather's family? The courtroom drama has only just begun, but the real twists may still be ahead. Will the truth be revealed, or will this case leave more questions than answers? The trial is just the beginning, but for now, we can only speculate. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss part 2 of this shocking story, where we'll dive deeper into the trial and what happens next.